The Demon of Florence, Chapter 7, Purgatory. Machiavelli squinted as he walked out of the prison. The light of the morning was so bright it was practically blinding. He looked around and saw the people of Florence coming and going along the quiet streets. He had half expected someone to throw stones at him, but they all seemed blissfully unaware of the fact that one of their former rulers was limping out of prison. Nevertheless, he was free.
"Signor Machiavelli?"
A voice called to him from the distance. Nearby, he saw a driver standing next to a carriage, holding the door open.
"I've come to take you home."
"Grazie, signor. Do you know Sant'Andrea in Purgatory?" The driver nodded, and Machiavelli climbed into the carriage. The driver closed the door, climbed onto the front of the carriage, and whipped the reins. Now seated in the carriage, Machiavelli looked down at his outfit, and he could see that his clothes were practically falling off of him. He reckoned he must have lost half his body weight from months of starvation and torture. But as the carriage moved through the city, Machiavelli saw the wooden gallows in the town square. He instinctively clutched his own neck in fear. Torture is far more preferable to the alternative, he thought to himself. And as the gallows faded from view, he allowed himself to exhale. He had done it. He had talked his way out of an execution. Luca no doubt had delivered his letter to the mysterious Signor Donati. Machiavelli had promised the reclusive fixer everything he had, all of his land and worldly possessions, if he would intercede on his behalf. And Donati had done so. But obviously, Machiavelli had no intention of giving Donati everything, and he began conniving as to how he would weasel out of this promise. He knew he had to give Donati something, enough to maintain a cordial relationship, but not so much that it would be a genuine threat to his wealth. Assuming I have anything left. Machiavelli had no idea what the Medicis had done to his family estate. He might return home to find a garrison of Medici soldiers occupying his home. His thoughts returned to the bishop, who acted like a complete imbecile while granting him clemency. Machiavelli had no idea how any man could manipulate a bishop so effectively. He concluded that Donati must somehow be a distant relative to Bishop Sforza. But then why would the bishop act like such a buffoon? Blackmail, no doubt. But before he came up with a plausible blackmail scenario, exhaustion took over, and he fell asleep. Machiavelli woke up to a searing pain in his arm. Ah! His eyes opened wide and he saw the carriage driver pulling it. "Get off!"
"I'm sorry, signor, but we're here."
The driver continued to pull at Machiavelli's dislocated arm. "Leave off!"
"Sir, you must go."
The driver put his arm around Machiavelli's back and began pulling him out of the carriage. Machiavelli stumbled while descending the steps on his way out. He caught himself and turned back and glared at the driver. But the driver merely slammed the door shut, climbed back onto his carriage, whipped the reins, and took off.
Ah!
How rude! Machiavelli turned around, but the palace he saw was not his family estate.
"Hey! Where did you take me? You can't just leave me here."
But the carriage kept on moving. Machiavelli began running after the carriage, but he could only manage to get a few meters before he had to stop. He bent over with exhaustion. He could feel a stitch in his side, and his throat felt as dry as a desert. He turned around and took in the large palace. It appeared to have been abandoned for decades. He walked up the stairs and came to two large marble doors. The right one contained a fat demon's head with a knocker hanging out of its mouth. He reached up to knock, but then noticed the door was ajar. so he proceeded cautiously inside.
Hello? Signor Donati? I just wanted to thank you for everything. I am forever in your debt.
But no response came. No nobleman, no servants, just silence. He could see the sun setting through the windows. To the left, there was a grand dining room, but it was covered in dirt and cobwebs. And to the right, there was a library which looked remarkably clean. He entered the library and found that it was grand, even by Italian standards. Shelves full of books stretched to the high ceiling. At the far end of the library was a small fireplace and a large sofa. Next to the sofa was a small table with a plate of food laid out. He felt his stomach growl. His eyes first focused on a small loaf of bread. He picked it up and tore half of it off with his teeth. He nearly choked chewing the bread up, but he washed it down with a nearby cup of water. After nearly swallowing the remaining half of the loaf, he ignored the fork on the plate and picked up a small morsel of meat and stuffed it into his mouth. Cold mutton had never tasted so savoury. After he had inhaled all of the food and downed the water, he became fearful, wondering whether the food was meant for him. But he looked down, and nestled under the plate was a note. The sun was almost gone, so he held the letter up to catch the final remnants of daylight. Signor Machiavelli, please partake. I will receive you in the evening. Sincerely, D. While his angst around offending Signor Donati was now assuaged, he found that he was secretly wishing that his benefactor had provided some wine. Nevertheless, he decided to feign gratitude again.
Thank you, Signor Donati. Wherever you are. I am most humbled by your kindness and hospitality.
But no response came. Machiavelli looked around, taking in the library. He noticed above the fireplace, laying on the mantel, was a copy of Dante's Purgatorio. Machiavelli found the ancient story about overcoming the 7 deadly sins to get into heaven both superstitious and melodramatic. But he walked over to the book and opened it. He saw that it was filled with copious amounts of notes in the margins, written in a language he didn't understand. Signor Donati must be religious. That's how he was able to convince the bishop. So is he seeking to purge his own sins? Or mine? Ugh. The last thing he wanted to hear right now was a fanatical sermon.
The living statues in Purgatory. They represent humility.
Machiavelli spun around and saw a tall figure standing at the entrance of the library, wearing a hood and a long flowing cloak that stretched all the way to the ground, and the face was completely covered with a golden mask.
To be frozen in stone is to be cleansed of pride.
The hairs of Machiavelli's neck stood up as he saw the imposing figure approach him. He sensed danger, but he forced himself to bow. But as he lowered his torso, he kept his gaze set upon the golden mask.
Signor Donati,
It's Signora, actually.
Of course, Signora Donati. I am so grateful to the Holy Mother for your intervention. Molto grazie.
The tall female now towered over him.
Your gods have nothing to do with your deliverance, no matter what the bishop might have told you.
Machiavelli tried to swallow the lump forming in his throat. Out of the corner of his eye, he began to look for exits, but she was blocking the only way in or out of the library. He bowed again and said,
Yes, well, Signora, you have my eternal gratitude for giving me back my life. Your Grace...
I have given you nothing, Signor Machiavelli.
What do you mean?
I've purchased your life from the hangman's noose. You owe me a debt, which I intend to collect.
And I am happy to pay.
But the figure shook her head no.
Let me be clear, Nicola Machiavelli. Your life belongs to me now. Welcome to Purgatory.
This has been The Demon of Florence by Andrew L. Productions. It was performed by Elliott Crossley with the voice talents of Daisy May Parsons. If you've enjoyed this broadcast, please be sure to subscribe and give us a like. And if you're in a position to help, please feel free to visit our Patreon page, Andrew Creates. It really helps us out a lot. Thank you.